Thousands of Ethiopians took to the streets to protest what they described as interference by the United States. During the May rallies in the capital Addis Ababa, the protesters filled the city's old stadium and the surrounding streets in a well-organized, peaceful demonstration dubbed Voices of Freedom and Sovereignty. The protesters had a clear message to the U.S. Hands off Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, my country, will proceed forward and won't go back. America should take its hands off us, and Egypt should refrain from the Nile Dam to show them that we Ethiopians will continue as a nation.
Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of Africa Today, a program which brings you up-to-date analysis on African affairs. In our show today, we are focusing on Ethiopia's rejection of meddling by Western countries, especially the US, as it battles a rebel movement in the country's Tigray region. In the second segment of our program, we'll be talking about the recent parliamentary elections in Algeria as the country moves towards political stability. Now stay with us till the end of the show and send us your comments as you watch.
US meddling in Ethiopia's Tigray. Ethiopia has been under increasing pressure from Western powers in connection with the situation in the country's Tigray region, where a rebel movement has taken up arms against the central government. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered a ground and air military operation in Tigray in early November 2020 after accusing the region's then governing party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front or the TPLF, of orchestrating attacks on federal army camps, an allegation rejected by TPLF officials. The Prime Minister accused the TPLF of openly undermining his government.
Intent on perpetuating a culture of impunity and restoring the undue privilege they enjoyed in the past. The TPLF old guards have continuously mounted both covert and overt attempts to undermine the people of Ethiopia and our new administration.
The Ethiopian military, aided by Eritrean troops, has been battling forces loyal to the TPLF for nearly 8 months. According to some reports, Western countries, including the United States, are backing the TPLF rebels. The conflict has killed thousands of people and many more, triggering an immense humanitarian crisis. The United States has seen the conflict in Tigray as an opportunity to meddle in Ethiopia's internal affairs and has announced sanctions against this Horn of Africa nation. Ethiopians held a massive rally in the country's capital, Addis Ababa, to condemn US interference in the country's internal affairs. Addressing the rally, Addis Ababa Mayor Adanesh Abebe said Ethiopia will never kneel down to the US.
አሜሪካና አጋሮቿ የዚህን ኃይል የጥፋት ጉዞና ተግባር በቅጡ ሳይረዱ በውስጣዊ ጉዳያችን ጭምር በመግባት የሚያስቀምጡት ቅድመ ሁኔታና የጉዞ ማዕቀብ በፍጹም ተቀባይነት የሌለው ብቻ ሳይሆን
The conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region risks heightening tensions surrounding the country's hydroelectric power project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Negotiations over the dam with neighboring countries, Sudan and Egypt, have stalled and could be delayed further while the Ethiopian government responds to the ongoing crisis. Now, for more on the situation in Ethiopia, we have contacted Farama Alim, a senior Kenyan politician and an expert on Horn of Africa affairs. Thank you very much, Mr. Maalim, for your time.
Thank you.
Now, our first question. Ethiopians are protesting against U.S. interference in the country's ongoing Tigray conflict. What's the extent of this meddling and what are the interests of Washington in this conflict?
Washington has a very powerful, very deep-rooted and old interest in Ethiopia and in the Horn of Africa in general, but in particular in Ethiopia, because for close to 30 years, the TPLF regime that controlled Ethiopia had worked as a surrogate, as a kind of the blue-eyed boys of the American foreign policy in Africa. And they were playing the role that Israel plays for America in the Middle East. They were playing it for the Horn of Africa. And so when you lose such a powerful ally who does all the biddings for you, it is costly, and they would want them back. But not because of the interest of Ethiopia or the interest of the continent, the wider continent, or the Horn of Africa. That is purely for American strategic interest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farah Maalim, for that insight.
Eritrea's foreign minister has blamed the US for the current conflict in northern Ethiopia's Tigray region. Eritrea says US administrations supported the Tigray People's Liberation Movement, or the TPLF, for over 2 decades. In a letter to the UN Security Council, Eritrean Foreign Minister Usman Saleh accused President Joe Biden's administration of stoking further conflict and destabilization through interference and intimidation in the region, apparently to resuscitate the remnants of the TPLF regime. As we have seen, Eritrea has also blamed the US for destabilization in Ethiopia's Tigray region, what prompted the authorities in Asmara to issue the statement.
And the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which also controlled Ethiopia through the EPRDF, had waged a war against Eritrea. That was a very costly war in which they wanted to recapture Eritrea and exercise that hegemony. And that was also done with the tacit approval, the support, the financing, and all the elements of the Americans and the Western countries for that purpose. So Eritrea sees the meddling of the Horn of Africa by America and its Western allies, and has seen it from the beginning. It maintained its own independence, small as it may be. It is the only country that has stood firm and that has said a no, a big no with a capital N, to that meddling. Right now, the Americans are trying to revive the TPLF again. You don't forget, Americans gave billions and billions of dollars in aid to TPLF, which was not accountable.
The TPLF led the coalition that ruled Ethiopia for nearly 30 years until Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed rose to power in 2018. He further alienated the TPLF by making peace with longtime foes Eritrea as soon as he took office. Abiy Ahmed won the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize for his peacemaking efforts, which ended 2 decades of hostility with longtime enemy Eritrea. This is what he had to say on reconciliation with Eritrea.
I believed peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea was within reach. I was convinced that the imaginary wall separating our 2 countries for much too long needed to be torn down. And in its place, a bridge of friendship, collaboration, and goodwill has to be built to last for ages. That's how I approached the task of building peace, a peace bridge with my partner, President Isaias Afwerki. We were both ready to allow peace to flourish and shine through.
Eritrea says that the US wants to resuscitate the remnants of the TPLF regime, which ruled Ethiopia for nearly 30 years. Now, does this imply that the US is at odds with the current government of Abiy Ahmed?
The gains that were done by Abiy Ahmed has made massive strides and massive gains in the interest of the people of Horn of Africa in the wider sense. That includes Eritrea and Somalia, and also in the interest of the Ethiopian people themselves. I mean, that is not something that Americans would be happy with. Americans don't care what happens to the populations of any country. You've seen what they did in Libya. You've seen what they've done in Iraq. You've seen what they've done in Syria. You've seen what they're doing right now, using their own other mercenary terrorist, government that they prop up in the Gulf states in the name of the Emirates and the Saudis to Yemen. So they don't care what happens to the 120 million Ethiopians. They only care about their own interests and this bunch of a small minority that they have been using all this time to do the bidding for them. And it's precisely because of that they want to bring them back. But they can't bring them back. Ethiopians are known to resist any form of domination.
Now, Western countries are accusing Ethiopia of using starvation as a weapon of war. Ethiopia's UN ambassador, Tai Atske-Selesi Amde, has categorically rejected these accusations.
When someone labels us that we are using starvation as an instrument of weapon or war, it indeed pains us. It brings back a terrible memory of hunger. So, if, as I said in the council, if we did it, of course, we will definitely carry the albatross around our neck. The guilt will be on us.
The United States envoy to the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, recently issued a thinly veiled threat against Ethiopia by stating that it is time to move from analysis to action regarding Tigray. Now, Mr. Farah, the Biden administration recently appointed Jeffrey Feltman as the first U.S. special envoy to the Horn of Africa. Do you expect to see more meddling by the U.S. in this volatile and strategic region?
Yes, they will do a lot of meddling. They will create all the conflicts that they can create. American foreign policy in Africa and in other third world countries like the Middle East triumphs or operates or escalates always violence and destruction of state and society, disintegration of state and society. And wherever they went, that's what they did. And they intend to do that also, but I don't think they're going to succeed this time. The African continent has come out of these things wiser, and they know that the Americans are not interested in the African people themselves. They're only interested in the resources and the strategic position of these countries that are in the Horn of Africa. So they will continue meddling, but I don't think they can go far. They tried to meddle in the internal affairs of Eritrea for many years, for about 30 years now, and they lost. So Eritrea and Ethiopia now has also woken up to the realization, and they have a good leader in the name of Abiy Ahmed, who cares about his people, who cares about his continent, who cares about his wider region of Horn of Africa.
Thank you for that, Mr. Farah Maalim.
The situation in Tigray has raised concern that the meddling by Western powers is meant to trigger the disintegration of Ethiopia, which is one of Africa's fastest growing economies. Some experts believe it could soon reach middle-income status.
Now, our last question. Are Western countries pursuing a policy to balkanize Ethiopia by backing the TPLF, which is pursuing a secessionist agenda?
They will pursue this secessionist idea to the extent of empowering them to take over again power at the center in Addis Ababa. I don't think the Americans really want to create small countries in Ethiopia. No, they want to use them right now as a secessionist movement, but the ultimate objective, the same way when the TPLF came to power, they came in as the Tigray People's Liberation Front and were agitating to secede from Ethiopia, but they never seceded from Ethiopia because they realized they had an opportunity right now to use the resources of that country and to basically brutalize it the way they brutalized it for all those years. And I think the Americans also want to use them to do the same again. Roll back again into Addis Ababa, take over the reins of power using the tanks and the weapons and the resources and then all that's given to them by America and its own other mercenary surrogates like the leadership right now in Egypt.
Now, thank you very much, Mr. Farah Maalim, Horn of Africa Affairs expert, for your insight on the situation in Ethiopia. Now, we shall take a short break, and when we come back, we shall focus on the recent parliamentary elections in Algeria. Stay with us.
Algeria moving towards stability.
Algeria's former ruling party, the FLN, won most seats in the June parliamentary elections. Now, the early election was supposed to exemplify President Abdelmadjid Tebboun's new Algeria with an emphasis on young candidates and those outside the political elite. Now, this is what the president had to say in February when he dissolved the previous parliament.
المجلس الشعبي الوطني الحالي وسنمر مباشرة من بعد إلى انتخابات لتكون خالية من المال سواء كان فاسد وغير فاسد تفتح أبوابها للشباب وقلت.
Following the June elections, Algeria's FLN, long the country's biggest political party, won the most seats in the parliamentary election. The FLN's 105 seats were far short of the 204 needed to secure a majority in the 407-seat parliament, with the Islamist MSP winning 64 seats. FLN's victory surprised many observers who had written off the party due to its links with former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Young people in Algeria have praised new electoral laws which presented them with opportunities.
وذلك خاصة بما منحه قانون جديد للانتخابات بإشراك الشباب يعني بصفة قوية بصفة يعني النصف للقوائم الحرة والأحزاب.
The vote was held successfully despite a boycott by the long-running Iraq protest movement. Now, for more analysis on the recent elections in Algeria, we contacted Sami Hamdi, the editor-in-chief of the International Interest. Thanks a lot, Mr. Hamdi, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Mr. Hamdi, will the new parliament support President Abdelmadjid Tebboun's program as Algeria moves towards stability and progress?
The parliament and the role of these elections was to create some sort of legitimacy where legitimacy did not exist before. It was about filling this political vacuum that was left behind by the fall of Bouteflika and the absence of any renewed elected body. It's important to remember that the parliament before the elections was the parliament from the Bouteflika regime and not a parliament truly representative of the Hirak movement. Your question is that the parliament will go along with Tebboune.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamdi, for that insight.
Analysts say significant changes were made in the elections that cannot be underestimated, most notably the rise in civilian nominees amongst all the leading parties. The new changes include the Movement of Society for Peace bloc and the National Construction Movement, which will bring about some sort of balance in the political scene and in parliament. Algerians also had high hopes while going to the polls. An older voter expressed his optimistic outlook. Let's take a listen.
شادين فيها راك تشوف 84 سنه في عمري نط على 8 جيت نفوتي باسكو راني طامع باللي التغيير يكون.
Now, Mr. Hamdi, in your opinion, will the parliamentary elections make a difference in the country?
I think it depends. I think it's important to stress that the regime is trying to steamroll the popular protest. Not necessarily because it is entirely against the popular protest, but because there are certain fears and legitimate fears, if we're speaking objectively, that it has if these protests continue for an extended period of time. The first fear is that it gives rise to the separatist tendencies that the Algerian government is especially sensitive to. These separatist tendencies, the Amazigh, the Berber, we've seen more of their flags being waved in the Hirak movement, and we've seen that the overwhelming boycott of the elections actually took place in those regions. There was whole region-wide boycott of the elections from the Amazigh regions. And the government fears that if the protests keep continuing, then France is going to support some sort of separatism, which it would be happy to do so in order to weaken Algeria.
Well, a very interesting angle there by Mr. Hamdi that France might be interfering in Algeria's internal affairs by supporting protesters and others who boycotted the elections in the country. Algeria actually cancelled the accreditation of France 24. a day after the June parliamentary elections. The government said the move was due to the satellite news channel's clear and repeated hostility towards Algeria and its institutions.
The outlet said authorities had given the channel a final warning on March 13th over its coverage of Friday marches of the long-running Hirak anti-government protest movement. Ammar Belhima, the communications minister and government spokesperson, told the Algeria official news agency that France 24 failed to respect journalistic rules and ethics, saying it practices disinformation and manipulation in addition to confirmed hostility against Algeria. What will be the fate of the Hirak movement after the elections? Will its support wane?
I think the awkward thing about the Hirak is that the people who are participating in the Hirak have always boasted that their plus point or their positive point is they have no leadership, which has always baffled me and confused me. And it's one of the reasons why they've been unable to really translate their gains into tangible political gains that might actually be reflected in the parliament or even reflected in politics generally. But also it's important to talk realities in that the Hirak itself is badly divided, and that's primarily because it's easy to unite to bring down a regime such as the Bouteflika regime, because Bouteflika was the lightning rod. The reality is everybody has their own opinion. You have separatist tendencies, you have leftist tendencies, you have pro-Islam tendencies, you have nationalist tendencies that are unable to see eye to eye. And I think this is one of the reasons that the Hirak has been unable to essentially translate itself into some sort of political party that can actually dominate the parliament.
The recent parliamentary election in Algeria had one major difference from previous elections, and that was the much larger number of independents winning seats in parliament. Algerians voted for the independent candidates with high expectations. Now, this young Algerian voter believes the new parliamentarians will bring the much needed change.
سينو راهم يشرطوا لنا زعما كارطة تاع الفوت بك تخرج كوارط لازم يشرطوا الكارطة.
Mr. Hamdi, our last question. Why have we seen an increase in the number of independents? Now, does this imply that voters have no trust in political parties?
It is the prevalent opinion, and people like this idea of I am independent, I am not associated with a party, I am not associated with a particular faction, I am not associated with a particular ideology, because the connotations and the implications are so strong in the Algerian subconscious. And this is why a lot of independents, while they ran as independents, they were aligned somewhat to different parties, but didn't say that openly because they were worried about how that would be received by the Algerian people. The reality is also that the political culture in Algeria, and indeed in the North African countries, is still not necessarily at a level whereby they can differentiate between the various different political parties. There's still this sensationalism whereby everybody is corrupt, everybody is bad, everybody's in it for their self-interest. Whereas if you were to apply a more nuanced approach and actually look at the realities on the ground, I think there are very sincere individuals who actually engage with the political process in order to try to achieve something.
Thank you very much, Sami Hamdi, Editor-in-Chief of the International Interest. Now, unfortunately, our time is up for today. Well, that wraps it up for this week's edition of Africa Today. It's been great having you, and don't forget to drop us a line through our social media handle. And until next time, it's goodbye for now.